So thank you again for coming out. Greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Greetings of peace upon you and the mercy of God. I was asked today to talk about pathways to the sacred. And when I think about pathways to the sacred in Islam, anything could be a pathway to the sacred. Communing with the goats, possibly communing with the chickens, although I'm a latecomer on that one potentially. But I divided the talk today into three main pathways. And the first pathway we could think of as the pathway of the heart, the metaphorical heart, what it's called the qalb in Arabic. And the word qalb, the root of that is qallaba, which means to turn and to turn. So the qalb turns, the organ of the qalb turns the blood, and the organ of the heart turns, the scholars say in Islam, from attraction to the life of the world to realization that God is the ultimate ideal focus. And so just like the heart is doing this beating and sending the blood all around, the qalb is the place of kind of spiritual energy as well. And so I'll talk a little bit about spiritual practices that are in pathways to the sacred. Islam is really a religion of the mind, the aql. Aql is something that ties down the human being. And aql in Arabic, it's often juxtaposed with naql, which means speech, or in this case, revelation. And so for Muslims, this combination of revelation, which tells us things that we couldn't possibly rationally necessarily know, with the aql that tells us rationally what's good, what is the purpose of life. So these two things coming together are the two major weights of the intellectual, if you will, pathway to the sacred in Islam. And I'll say a little bit more about that. And communal engagement, if you want to think about this, is the work of the hands, right? Because these first two, there's a personal component to them, but they're certainly not done in isolation. You need a community of believers to be sustained in your spiritual practices. You need a community, an intellectual community as well. And of course, communal engagement has a service dimension as well. So service in Arabic is called khidma. And that's the idea that we serve first and foremost, we're vice regents, you might say, of God. So we serve God, but then we serve each other as well. And I'll say more about that. Does anyone, you can shout it out if you know it, does anyone have an idea what that is on the screen there? And I know some of you in the back know absolutely what this is, so. Very good, yes. So that's the Arabic for Allah, which literally means the God. And so this is not, it oftentimes confuses people, this is not imagined to be a separate God. So in the Quran, Allah is mentioned as the God of the children of Israel, of the Masihiyun, the Christians. So the way the Quran describes it, the way Muslims understand it is, this is the same God. We might have a slightly different definition. Some of us might say Trinity, other people, for Muslims, we don't say Trinity, but we're still trying to articulate that relationship to that same God. So all of the pathways to the sacred are ideally leading to Allah. And you'll notice I didn't put a picture up here, I put words, because much like the Jewish culture, Muslims don't depict any images of God, but the script stands in for that entity that to which we direct our attention. This one's a little bit harder. Does anyone have a sense, beside those in the room who I know already know, what that might be? This is much harder. Yeah, you can see Muhammad. I'll show you that in a minute. Can you see the little Allahs if you recognize? Let's go back to this first one here. You see that? You can kind of see them up at the top there. You can see the Muhammad down here. Muhammad. So yeah, this is the central creed of Islam. It's kind of two phrases, and the first phrase is, there is no God, imagine in English a lowercase g, but God. And then the second part here is that Muhammad is a prophet of God. And that A is very important because it means that Muhammad is one of many prophets. So Muslims will consider Jesus a prophet, and Moses a prophet, and Abraham a prophet. And you'll hear me throughout the lecture, when I mention a prophet's name, I'll send peace and blessings upon that prophet. So you'll hear me say, possibly in English, possibly in Arabic, peace be upon him, or peace be upon, if I talk about Mary, I'll say peace be upon her. And so that first part, there is no God but God. Behind that is, there is no destination other than God. There is no entity that ultimately exists. Human beings, the created world, for Muslims is all a contingent existence, and that may resonate with your own personal theologies if you've grown up in Christianity or Judaism or other monotheistic faiths. So this is called the Shahada. I don't know if I remembered to say that, but Shahid in Arabic is to witness something, as in to see it, like many of us spend a lot of time watching TV. So you would use that same verb to mean watching. But also it means something deeper. It means to be able to testify to something. And if you're able to testify to something, it means you have an experiential knowledge of that whatever it is you're testifying about. So the Shahada is both kind of an intellectual statement about, I believe that there's one God and I believe that the Prophet Muhammad is a messenger of God. But on a deeper level, it's the sense that I can testify, I can witness to that because I've to continue with the path metaphor, I've walked on that spiritual path. Here we have one of the most important phrases in Islam, the Bismillah, which all of these are different variations of the same phrase, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. And so this, I wanted to show you a little bit about this, the calligraphy here, so that you get a sense that the word itself is spiritual for Muslims. So rather than maybe looking at a statue, if we look at a beautiful carving that has a name of God, a beautiful name of God, here we have Al-Rahman and Al-Rahim. Rahim is the root for womb as well, so this has deep feminine resonances, this particular name of God. It appears in the Quran multiple times, most prominently these two names at the beginning of chapter headings. So Muslims use this because the Quran begins with this phrase, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. We try to start everything. So when I was walking to the podium, I was saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When I start my car, I say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When I exit the house, I do this. So this phrase is very much, this is like the first, if you will, pathway to the sacred. And with this phrase, any act can become an embodiment of this spirituality. So even before couples are intimate with each other, you can say this phrase and say a prayer that the intimacy is a beautiful intimacy, and that if there's any children conceived, that they are set firm upon a beautiful path. As I'm working as a chaplain, one of the things that I like to tell young people is this particular saying. This is a saying that's called a hadith Qudsi. Hadith is a saying generally of the Prophet Muhammad that has been passed down in the oral tradition. And Qudsi, Qudus, is the word for holy in Islam. You might know that Jerusalem in Arabic is called al-Quds, which is the sort of the holy city. We call it in English the Holy Land, right? So this is a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad that Muslims believe he received directly from God. And God says, take one step towards me and I will take 10 towards you. Walk towards me, I'll run to you. And this is an English translation, but it goes on. And the emphasis is that when we as human beings start walking along this path, the sacred path towards God, God is coming towards us as well. And that has been a key component of my own spirituality. And also when I'm working with particular young people, as I was working for many years, helping them in their crisis moments, saying, just you take one step and God metaphorically, we don't as Muslims say God has legs per se, but metaphorically God comes closer as well. So this pathway to the sacred, one end of it is the ultimate being, the supreme being, but that supreme being is in a direct relationship with each person, is the idea. So this city on the top, does anyone, other than those of you who already know, have an idea what this particular city might be? And I've actually just told you, in a way, what it is. That's a great guess. It is not Mecca. It's Medina, yes. And Medina just means the city. Okay, so the full name for Muslims is Medina Munawwara. Nur in Arabic means light. And so Medina Munawwara is the city, the enlightened city, or the city of light. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is buried in that place under the tiny little green dome in the back there. And millions upon millions of Muslims go. In fact, my husband right now is in Medina right now, paying a visit to the Prophet. And so the legacy, I'll talk a minute about the Quran as a pathway to the sacred. But for Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad is like the guide on the path. And that guidance is both in what he taught and what is passed down, but there's also a metaphysical aspect of that guidance. And that's why people go to Medina, because they go seeking out that proximity. And it's a mystical belief, but that Muslims have, is that whenever we send peace and blessings upon the Prophet, we're actually asking God to shower blessings upon the Prophet. And there's a saying that says, in the grave, because prophets have a special status when they pass away, in the grave, the Prophet Muhammad returns the salams to us. So people seek this proximity. It's one thing to be in Hingham and sending salams to the Prophet, but it's another thing for Muslims to be sitting inside the mosque, and I wish I put a picture of inside that particular mosque, and sending salams to the Prophet. Salams is the Americanized version of peace and blessings upon him. With that proximity, knowing that the guide, that our particular guide on our particular path, is just a few feet away in that resting place. And so this is a deep aspect of Muslim spirituality. And it's even said that if you cannot find a teacher in the world, a teacher of spirituality, then saying salam on the Prophet as many times as you can substitutes for a teacher in the physical kind of manifestation in a person. So that connection is very deep for Muslims. And those of you who come from a Christian background could imagine what the disciples felt, and then in turn, that connection to the figure of Jesus. And so we as Muslims, we turn to the figure of Jesus too in the teachings, but that Prophet Muhammad is like our particular specific guide. So there's a relationship there that's a very blessed one. And so this being a companion on the path is that physical sense of companionship, but it's also following the teachings. And so this is a hadith, beautifully rendered in calligraphy. And this particular hadith says, the Muslim is the one from whose tongue and hands others are safe. And this, to me, the power here of the tongue. In Islam, human beings are the haywan natiq, the animal, the speaking animal, meaning the rational, the animal with this rational intellect, natiq. And so the tongue, what we say, is a huge part of spirituality. And one of the best things for the tongue to be able to be saying is remembrance of God. So praises like, God is the greatest, glory be to God, all praise be to God, things along this line, or I turn to God in repentance. So this is even when you're walking the dog or doing whatever it is. Ideally, the tongue is busy in this type of remembrance, and it's said that if the tongue continues this type of remembrance, the heart gets trained to do this type of remembrance. The tongue, interestingly, can also be, not so great for the human being, because the tendency, for instance, to backbite, it's considered in Islam a major sin. So of the same magnitude as fornication, adultery, some of these other just major offenses. This is hard. It's the Prophet Muhammad has a lot of sayings about controlling the tongue, including one that I particularly like is, if the human being could only control what is between his two lips and his two thighs, we'd all be better off. Now, there's been a lot of polemics about Islam and the treatment of women, and so I wanted to just highlight for a moment women's spirituality. And this is another hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. However much the faith of a man increases, his regard for women increases. The Prophet Muhammad had a 23-year ministry, and so many of the reports about him relate to the influence of the women in his life and his influence on the women. He would have study circles that were women's only study circles. He was oftentimes bringing social reforms that elevated the status of women in the society. And we're celebrating about 100 years of women having the vote in this country. And it's I think, a really profound aspect of his legacy, that in the 7th century, women were very much a part of his political community, and they did many things. And they were nurses, they were ran the marketplace as inspectors in the marketplace in this early era. They were incredible philanthropists, not just in the 7th century, but throughout Islamic history. And so this women's spirituality has always been a very key part. There's every ritual that's incumbent, kind of the main rituals of Islam, the praying, the fasting, the going on pilgrimage, and all of these central rituals are incumbent upon women just as they're incumbent upon men. So women have always been incorporated into the spiritual community as well. And there's usually questions on that particular point, so save them if you have questions on that. This is another hadith I just want to point out here. This is a piece of art that I have in the book over here. It's from an artist in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, who's a stained glass artist. He's a UU pastor in Fitchburg, and he carved these beautiful Arabic letters out of stained glass. I've done a lot of traveling all around different Muslim majority countries, and I've never seen such beautiful letters carved out of stained glass. And to me, this is sort of a melding of the beautiful stained glass tradition with the Arabic calligraphy. And so this says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه, otherwise known as the Golden Rule. None of you believes until you love for your brother, or fellow human being, as it were, what you love for yourself. So this, I've already told you, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. And this golden rule principle, God introduces God's self to human being as the kind and the merciful. And then a core principle of spirituality is that belief, so an intellectual belief or a spiritual belief, has to manifest in this relational empathy. And that's the kind of a defining factor in Islamic spirituality. So there again we have, do you remember what this is? Yes, good. And over here is the alayhi salam, upon him peace. And so it's often said that the Prophet Muhammad is this exemplar of how to be empathetic with people. And sometimes that means being strong or setting boundaries. Can you tell I work in a high school? So there's an aspect that God is merciful and God is compassionate, but God is also just. And there's other names of God that are names of strength, names of what's known in Arabic, names of majesty. And this is part of spirituality, is understanding when to show mercy in a soft way and when to show mercy. I'm also a parent of a teenager too, so setting boundaries is in a merciful way is something I've been working on. So meditations on this divine oneness. We've just seen acting in the world with this sense of balance, but this has anyone seen this live? Yeah. So I still have not. This is one of the things that I'd really like to do in life. But the whirling of the dervishes is symbolic of kind of the unity, because the circle is unending. So this is a symbol of the divine oneness. And while they're twirling, the point is not just the twirling. The point is the remembrance of God and this continual movement. And one of the things that the twirling sort of reminds me of is that the continuity of life. And at some point the dervishes stop twirling. They can't twirl forever. And that, to me, when you're in that twirling, it's this beautiful meditation, and at some point it has to end. And that to me is a little bit of a reflection of life. And so for Muslims, part of spirituality is reflecting, in fact, on death and on the end, and on the sense of never knowing if that end is near or years away, and always kind of being prepared, so that the spirituality becomes this continuous thing, but at some point even that ends. This embodied sense of knowing that this whirling practice represents is, I think, what Muslims are trying to strive for. So our prayers, for instance, are embodied prayers. There's a separate word for prayers that are just said spontaneously, but the washing of the ritual before the prayers is symbolic of the washing of the hands, the washing of the mouth, the washing of the sensory organs, and the washing of the feet. And in this particular practice, this prayer practice and this practice of washing, it's like a training for how to be in the world. So for instance, a tennis player has to practice a serve, or I don't play tennis, do you serve like this? Or like, I don't know, a squash player has to serve like this. They have to practice that serve, thousands of times before it just becomes this natural movement and they can get good at it. And the prayers are that type of meditation. So it's a pathway to the sacred, both in that it's connected to the time of day. So there's an awareness of the movement of the cosmos, the movement of the seasons, because the lengthening and shortening. But in that prayer, it's that sense of standing at attention, listening, reflecting, but physically as well, performing an act of worship. Lynne Cooper, soon to be Dr. Lynne Cooper, is a dear colleague of mine who is a Catholic chaplain. And she has a lovely essay in the book here that I think would speak to many of you in the room, of a time when she witnessed a dhikr circle, which is a circle of remembrance of Muslims saying names of God. And one of the most beautiful lines in the book comes from Lynne's essay, and she says that I felt the word mercy like in my body. And that to me encapsulates what this path of Muslim spirituality is about. It's about, yes, doing things in the external, but such that the external then begins to shape the internal reality as well. Now we get into a little bit more of the meeting of the heart and the intellect. So the Quran for Muslims, this is a Quran folio, and this is the top of the beginning of a particular surah. I think this one it's a watercolor one. I think it's either Spain or Tunisia. This one, maybe 13th or 14th century. This is these little medallions here demarcate the verses. You see here, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, that first line, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. And the interacting with the Quran is both an intellectual exercise, as many of you who interact with sacred scriptures know. It's intellectual and it's spiritual at the same time. And the Quran is called Quran because it's a recitation first and foremost. So it has, obviously we have written copies, but the Quran is alive, as Muslims would say, in the hearts of people. And the Quran over and over again calls people, have you not reflected? Have you not thought? Have you not considered? And so it's constantly appealing to the rational, intellectual side of human nature. And we could talk a little bit more about that perhaps in the question and answer. But one thing I want to point out is that the word for wisdom or knowledge in Arabic, ilm, it's like a knowing, is the same word for science. So a scientist is the same as sort of ulama, which are scholars of religion. So the way that Muslims relate to scholars is as sort of doctors of the spiritual sciences or something. My father always hoped that I'd become a real doctor, doctor of philosophy, but I said, whenever you have a philosophical crisis, you know where to come, Dad. He's like, that's great, but how about my blood pressure? But in any case, the Quran is this pathway to the sacred. Through the word, we started off with the power of the word that is front and center in Islamic devotion. The Quran contains a lot of descriptions, poetic descriptions of the natural world, a lot of language about the sun and the moon and their bounty of the earth, but it also contains a lot of stories. And I don't want to touch the computer in case it gets finicky again, but if you really train your eye in, you see that there's two people here. Yeah. This is a Persian miniature. And this is one of my favorite stories in the Quran. This is Zulaykha, Potiphar's wife, grabbing the back of Joseph's garment there. So much of the Quran are stories, and the forthcoming book that I have is reflecting on the women figures in the Quran and taking their stories as questioning what can they tell us today in our contemporary context. But this particular, for instance, this story of Joseph shows how the Quran is building on a prior legacy of spiritual teachings, right? A prior sacred history. And so part of Muslim spirituality is not just knowing these stories in the Islamic context, but you'll see, I'm going to take this thread towards the end of the presentation. Part of Muslim spirituality, I think, I'm trying to argue, and this is my particular way of seeing it, is that we're in relationship with other communities who share our stories. So that for me is a particularly important part of the pathway to the sacred, is that awareness that other people are also on pathways to the sacred. So one of the pathways to the sacred for Muslims is also political action and political activism. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said once, the best of actions is a word of reprimand to an unjust ruler. So witnessing, standing for justice, and the Prophet Muhammad also said, if you can't, correct an unjust action with your hands, then you correct it with your tongue. If you can't correct it with your tongue, you just correct it with your heart. That's the weakest, but it's still beneficial. And so this sense of standing for the unjust is key, and the Quran is filled with why do they not stand up for the meek and the oppressed and the women and the children who cry out, who are going to be our helpers on this day, so etc. So this impulse to be engaged is pretty fundamental to Islam there. This image is actually also in the book there. It's a screen print about 2007, so very, very pretty recent. One of the things that Muslims have always done is live in proximity with people of other faiths and other backgrounds. And this sense of living in proximity has shaped Islam from the very beginning and continues to shape this discourse between Christians and Muslims, between Jews and Muslims, a Abrahamic dialogue of all the descendants of Abraham. And the Quran reflects a lot on the relationship between Christians and Muslims, Jews and Muslims. I recently, on Sunday night, came back and was on a plane, and I was so happy to be sitting next to a priest, and he was a priest of the Order of St. Pius. Pius the 10th or Pius the 12th, potentially. Or was it the 11th? Let's just say the 11th or thereabouts. And so I told him, I said, oh, have you heard about Glastonbury Abbey? I'm going to be speaking there on Thursday. And bless his soul, he said, well, that's a little strange.
That's Pius the 10th.
Okay, Pius the 10th, yes. Yes, because he explained to me how they still said Mass in Latin and didn't really follow along with Vatican II reforms and things. So you could imagine the passengers all around us were very amused by this conversation between this hijabi woman and this priest. But essentially, it was that living in proximity and having the conversations. And I think I was probably one of the first Muslims he ever talked to. So he was quite interested in the fact that Jesus was mentioned in the Quran. All he knew was that the Quran didn't refuted the Trinity, but he didn't realize that the Quran supported so many common concepts such that Jesus was impregnated, or Mary was impregnated through this angelic spirit, and that Jesus in Islam is understood as the Word of God. And he said, oh, like logos. I was like, yes, yes. I said, only we say kalimat, logos, just different language, same word. And so this recognition of all that we share, and yet at the same time our distinctness, I think, is really important. Now, have you noticed anything while I've been talking here about these little mosque-like structures? Yes, so if you look at the minarets here, you see that these are all iconic Western buildings. So this is an artist. She's also a young Muslim artist out of Washington, D.C. And her point in this is that we're neighbors. We're in dialogue and discourse with each other, and that this fear that we seem to have acquired and that all the sentiments of resentment are actually not useful. So here's another image that I wanted to show you, and this is a calligrapher. I mentioned the importance of the word, not only the word as the manifestation in the Quran, but also just this power of poetry. And poetry being, from the very beginning of Islamic civilization, a pathway to the sacred. And so this says, he's a young Palestinian man living now in the DC area, and he aspires to be an architect and design refugee camps so that they're more sustainable and things. So brilliant young man, Ahmed Abu Maragi. So in Jerusalem, despite successive calamities, a breeze of innocence and childhood fills the air. So this is what this says in Arabic there, the dove. And this is true. I had the pleasure of traveling to Jerusalem just in December. I was actually in Bethlehem, or Beit Lahem, as they would say in Arabic, in Christmas Day. And it was such a powerful, transformative experience for me. But it's interesting. There's the unrest, but there's also the collaboration, and they're layered upon each other in that place. And in many ways, it's a metaphor, I think, for our human condition more generally, that we have, an enlightened abbey like this that would, bring in a Muslim speaker to talk about spirituality. And then, it could be just right down on Main Street, you have people who are exchanging slurs against each other. So these impulses to collaborate seem to be right in proximity with the impulses to mistrust, to judge, to segregate. And this is a quote from Ahmed, and he says, "Hope keeps me alive, keeps me longing to a bright future where justice, mercy, and love are not just words, but a lived reality." so I would contend that part of Islamic spirituality is holding out this hope of a just future, even though the present can sometimes be one of trial and tumult. There's a saying of the Prophet that the trials of the Muslims are in this world, and so we try, anytime we face a struggle in this world as Muslims, we try to understand what is the spiritual meaning of this. So how do we get through trial by understanding what are the lessons, what are the ways in which the trial is fortifying, if you will, our spiritual heart or our spiritual aptitude. This is a picture from the green on Tufts University. This is henna. Has anyone had henna done? This is the solution if your children want a tattoo and you're not too keen on that. So this is an impermanent tattoo, lasts about 2 weeks, and it's a plant-based dye. And this is another way I think of spirituality is in sharing our traditions and our holidays and our customs and the things that we love, because in sharing and for the person who's kind of receiving that sharing, it cements the human bond between people. And I love henna for that because you actually, you hold one another's hands and it's such an intimate act. And this is a tradition that we do on holidays typically in Muslim communities. Doesn't have necessarily a spiritual meaning, but it's just that sense of community and celebration. And I already mentioned the importance of social justice activism and speaking out and collaborating on causes, whether it's for the weak or oppressed, as in this case here, or it's for just any social cause. This line here, Rabbi Michele, is a rabbi. She runs the Brown Hillel Center, and she has an essay that she let me reproduce for the book when the so-called Muslim ban first came out. She's an Iranian Jew, and being an Iranian Jew, Iran was one of the countries that was on this no-travel list, and so she, personally, not just only because of her political inclinations, but also just her personal connection to the Iranian people, felt this tremendous angst. She gave this beautiful speech on the State House saying, "Let my people in," right? So playing on Moses' words, like, "Let my people go." So she was saying, "Let my people in." It's a beautiful essay. You can find it on the internet, and I also, thankfully, they let me reprint it in the book. Finally, modalities of solidarity and standing up for each other. The Quran has a beautiful line, would not the people sort of stand up for each other, the houses of God on the earth would all be torn down. So the idea is that a place of worship is sacred to all people who have a sense of spirituality. And these are notes right here in blue that someone left on the cars at the mosque when there was a really heightened Islamophobia. I think it was around 2015. And this came across my Facebook feed, and I just appreciated it so much. The note says, "I'm so grateful that you are here, bringing all that you do. Your community stands proudly with you." So those little notes were left on the cars after Friday prayer. And just those gestures, those affirmations that we're a common humanity. We have philosophical differences, we have creedal differences, but we share a lot and we need each other. One of the efforts here in Boston that I found really beautiful was this initiative called One Out of Many, One. And you see here, Yasser Fahmy was an imam at the ISBCC, the Islamic Center of Boston, for many years and built a fantastic community there. And this is, you see Elizabeth Warren there and Marty Walsh. And one of the things that Marty Walsh said in that speech that has stuck with me is that he challenged every elected official to visit a mosque. This was 2016, before the next election. So here we are, the next election. I wonder how many people took him up. I have to say, our governor, Charlie Baker, has been very involved on Muslim causes and has been meeting with a lot of civic leaders. He's been doing a fantastic job. And I once said, we were in a meeting, different civic leaders, and he had stopped by, and I got a chance to talk with him afterwards. And I said, I travel all around the state, and I still meet people who have never met a Muslim in their life. And he says, I still meet people who've never met a Republican. I know how you feel. So this is, I'm almost finished here, and then we'll open up for questions. This is Celeb Shalom. This is made by a chaplain colleague of mine. And then over here you see a photography by Saskia Keeley, who she's an activist and a professional photographer, and she goes to different conflict-ridden places in the world and brings together a group from across the conflict divide and gives them a photography workshop, and then their assignment is then to kind of follow each other around into their homes, into their lives, and take pictures. So here's a picture of a Palestinian woman on the West Bank, and I'm not sure if she's a settler or if she's from one of the cities that are not settlements. But in any case, you see this sense of intimacy and proximity, and sort of like my challenge to all of you here today is, how do we find a pathway to the sacred, sort of by trying to understand what's sacred for the person across from us, or the person on the other side of the wall, as would be the case in many parts of Palestine. Finally, this is also another a sketch by the same young man who did the dove. And so this was a sketch. He did this as a demonstration in the subway. You might recall that a few years back there was a trend of people getting pushed into the subway tracks. Oftentimes they weren't even Muslims. They were just brown-skinned people. They were sick. They were, whatever. They just looked Muslim. And so he did this image. You'll see this is the DC subway map behind here. And this, to me, this graphic is so many people are living in fear in this country, having to kind of consistently watch their backs. And how can we together find a spirituality that gives people a way to feel safe among us? And finally, when we talk about the spirituality in the world amongst people, there's always, we're human beings. We make a lot of mistakes. How do we, acknowledge that we make mistakes? How do we seek forgiveness, give forgiveness? And to me, this is sort of a key to all of this. And in part, I talked in the beginning about empathy, but I think forgiveness is sort of the other kind of defining virtue of how well we can be in relationships with each other across lines of difference, such as faith, such as culture, ethnicity, race, etc. What does it take to forgive and to ask forgiveness? Very last slide. This is one of my teachers. I got to study abroad in Egypt, and she's an artist and a very beautiful soul. And this is castor oil. This is an installation that she did. And if you know castor oil, it's a cleaning agent. And so she made this installation at the time when the Arab Spring was sort of in its height and everyone's imagining kind of a new future for the region. And she says, maybe we also need an internal cleansing, a brain cleansing. We need to start with ourselves, question where we're coming from, question our ideologies, our prejudices, and now is the right time for that. So that's what I leave you with, and I just again wanted to, opening up for questions on that, but I again just wanted to emphasize how path setting the work that you're doing and bringing people in. So thank you. So one of the things that might be a little less known to Americans, but it's declassified now, is that our CIA staged a coup in Iran to overthrow a democratically elected leader, and which in the aftermath of that ushered in this Islamic revolution. And so there's this is not a natural development of Iranian culture and society. This is a response to an American intervention in the country's politics, and a covert one as well. And if you look at Iran, for instance, in the 1920s, there was probably more women in parliament than we have today in America. And so this event, the Western interference, let's just call it interference, Western interference, and its aftermath. By the way, the school I teach at, Groton School, the Kermit Roosevelt was the brains behind that CIA operation. So I feel like a very this is part of, just as the Roosevelt family and the policies, the social justice policies that they brought to this country, there was another side of that activism abroad. And so we have our intervention. I mean, just thinking for a second as Americans, as I'm sure many of us in the room are, we've actually been meddling in affairs that have, rather than elevating the state of women in places, have been very detrimental. And the same can be true not just in Iran, but in other countries as well. I mean, Afghanistan comes to mind, but many others. And so there's a sense that a lot of the conservatism is a backlash either against earlier forms of European colonialism or against more modern forms of neoliberalism and imperialism. So it's a complicated question. Yeah, so as other religions, Islam is an interpretive tradition, and so what we have are verses from the Quran, we have hadiths from the Prophet Muhammad, we have sayings from the early community as to how they conducted affairs, how things happened, the struggles that they faced, their solutions in their time. We have a legal tradition that sort of helps us use analogy, for instance, in deriving new applications of the law. So there's a very rich legacy, just as in a Western legal tradition, for how to think about what's right, what's wrong, what's prohibited, what's forbidden. And sometimes what happens, especially when you have the more modern Islamic societies that have been really severely impacted by European colonialism, is you have the scholarly class was either slaughtered, like Napoleon did in Egypt, thousands upon thousands of scholars who had a really deep intellectual, spiritual knowledge of the religion, or you just have what you have now is secularism and commercialism that are pervading in many places, and so there's a backlash against those forces. At the same time, there's a weakening of people's religious knowledge. And so in this vacuum, there's all kinds of forces that can come in and say, this is what Islam teaches. And without that sort of deep, centuries-old spiritual tradition, and without that sense that people in the society are being formed in a really robust way in terms of their character and their values, it creates a bit of a vacuum. There are no scholars to tell you what's right and wrong, and you're sort of cut off in a way from the tradition. So that's one of the issues, I think, that we're facing kind of globally as Muslims. The interesting thing here in the US, it's another trend entirely, because a lot of the people who came here, either who were converted in the 1920s into Islam, the African Americans who were inspired by Malcolm X, right here in Boston born, the people who came into Islam, whose foremothers potentially were brought as slaves to this country, have acquainted themselves kind of with this legacy. They came from West Africa. West Africa had a large Muslim civilizations. So between this African American population that's here and between the immigrant population that comes from all parts of the Muslim world, the affluence, the relative affluence that the communities have been able to build here, because they're immigrant communities, they're hardworking, they're establishing mosques, we're the beneficiaries. My generation, I'm a convert Muslim. I converted in my 20s, so I'm approximately 15 years old in Muslim years. But we're now benefiting from a tremendous scholarly explosion in some ways of just really fantastic thinkers and intellectuals. Many of us, as in my case, who have pursued traditional Islamic learning alongside Islamic studies that's been focused on history and anthropology and post-colonial studies in my case, gender studies. And so there's a beautiful confluence of kind of ways of knowing, if you will. So the American context right now, what's happening with this generation of scholars here, it's quite exciting. Was I talking about the womb?
You said often they begin many of the passages.
Oh, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, or the merciful, the compassionate.
Yes,
Yeah.
feminine and a masculine.
So there are oftentimes these two are names of God, and the rahim, the womb, is that same word for it. They all come from the same root, and so those words, although they take grammatically, they take a masculine form. In their semantic range of meaning, they include this organ that's so central to feminine identity. It's a Hebrew root too, I should add. Rachim is for Hebrew, so the concept is one that is also in Judaism and Christianity as well. This tradition of God having many names like this, it's also an ancient Hebrew tradition, so that there's a continuity there as well. To his credit, in case he's watching this at any point in his life, by the end we had a 2-hour approximately plane ride, and we chatted most of the time, and it was funny because then we also rode the rental car shuttle together, and then I was like, he was sitting in the front and he got off at the stop that I had to get off at, and I was like, should I just ride the bus around, because this is I don't want to trail the priest or something, and then he's really going to say, who did I sit next to, dark parking lot. But he gave me a little, we talked at length about Miriam, peace be upon her, and he gave me a beautiful little medallion that he had, and so I felt like it was his gesture to me to say, will you convert to Christianity? But also, but also, in a way, thank you for having this chat. And I mean, I think we both learned from that conversation. So, yeah. Yeah. There's in any, the way I think about conflict is in any moment of conflict, there's always the potential for transformation. And so I was kind of going into this conversation well, what can I learn from this person who's very, very grounded in his faith and his formation? So that's what I tried to, no matter who's in front of us, there's a learning opportunity, hopefully. 2015 and 2016 were the highest level of recorded hate crimes against Muslims in this country. So even more so than in 2001, 2002, 2003. So there's, identity is powerful. People feel it, and the message that's kind of been prominent in our political discourse is that the American identity is being diluted by people of color and immigrants, and this is, it can easily lead to what we would call in Islam a disease of the heart, this sense of someone is less entitled than I am, and fundamentally, if you trace it back, there's a deep arrogance about it, and arrogance is sort of one of those cardinal sins that can lead to a whole lot of other harmful ways of thinking. So on the one hand, in recent years, there's been just a permission for people to say what they think, maybe. And it's almost like this coming to the surface is maybe what is needed I'm thinking back to the last slide with the castor oil. When it comes to the surface, you can clean it off. If it's below the surface, you can't quite get to it. And so I'm hoping that this moment in our political history, kind of as a nation, is one, and I've seen signs that it's one where there is, just as you see this emerging violent rhetoric and hateful actions, devastation of Jewish cemeteries and the like, or here in Boston, the destruction of the Holocaust Memorial several times, right? These instances of hate are generating much, much more magnitude of caring and love in terms of the response from people. And so sometimes, I'm thinking of the natural world, I'm thinking of a metaphor. So sometimes the forest fire is devastating as it is, then you have all of that new growth. And I feel like I'm an optimist, I'm hoping we're in that kind of moment. In the introduction to the book, I tell the story, I think it was around 2015, 2016, when my daughter, that time she was around 11 or so, was listening to the TV, listening to the discourse and saying, Mommy, we're citizens, right? Like, what's the worst that they can do to us? And so it's real for people. There's statistics that say that most of Muslim school-age children in the US, the majority of them have been called like a sand N-word, have been called terrorist, have been called. So this is like more than half of American people attending American schools as Muslims. And I know it, even anecdotally, I know so many young people who go to extreme lengths to hide their Muslimness because they are kind of afraid of the social repercussions of openly identifying. Do we want to live in that type of a country? I mean, I don't. So there's work to be done, and it's work that's on the kind of communal level, the grassroots level, but we also need people who have massive platforms to be reiterating a message of love and unity and mutual care. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, the fact that you come out tonight is that sense of that grassroots solidarity, so thank you. Yes, and there's so many, the Daughters of Abraham come to mind. You mentioned book groups, so I'm thinking over here that there's Daughters of Abraham. So do you want to put your hands up so that people can identify you? So this is a book group that specifically gathers to form relationships, but around the common love of books, and they go from house to house. There's, I'm just thinking women's groups right now, there's Sisters of Celeb Shalom, and they have local groups and then national events, and they travel together. So they travel to places that have been historically important for cross-cultural relationships and have been. So they did a visit to Holocaust camps, for instance, to just sit with each other in that reality that of the banality of evil, as Henna Arendt said. And so those are two wonderful options for getting involved. Obviously, this lecture series that's really pioneering. There's many kind of opportunities for continual learning, and I think we have such a unique civic fabric here in the U.S. I mean, you don't find what we have here in terms of the civic life in other places in quite the same way. And I think religion and religious groups are a really important part of that identity. And I think we have to just keep kind of affirming that we're here and that we care and that religion is actually not the problem, that it's actually part of the solution and part of the ways in which we can develop empathy, develop compassion, be in relationships, recognize our common bonds. So, it's religion has done so much, religious groups, for the building of this, the America, the hospital systems, all of the charities. Catholics in particularly have just set a tremendous example that I know we look to in Muslim communities for how we want to have a social impact and kind of put our command to service into action. So I think we just have to keep reaffirming our desire for common humanity and our desire to be in service to one another rather than being isolationist.
Want that as well.
Yes, yeah, interfaith power and light. They're engaging around issues of climate justice and our collective problem that faces us all, the health of the planet. So, I can't speak from his platform. I can just speak anecdotally from what I saw. And we were, as Muslim communities, we're very concerned about sort of discrimination at the federal level of, unnecessary sort of profiling. And you might have heard of programs called like Countering Violent Extremism. And there's been many cases in the US where there have been government agents that go into Muslim communities and sort of target oftentimes the mentally impaired and convince them to adopt a terrorist ideology, and then give them the supplies to produce a bomb and then arrest them right before they can carry out the act, things like that. I mean, this is all declassified at some point. It sounds far-fetched, right? It sounds like an episode of, what is it called, Homeland or something? I don't know. I've never seen that show, but it sounds like a movie, but at the same time, it's real. The MSAs, the Muslim Student Associations in the New York area, they had undercover agents sort of going on whitewater rafting trips with the kids, trying to figure out who's the terrorist among them, which never really led to anything, needless to say. But for Muslim communities, that's the kind of issues that are oftentimes, when we're in conversations with elected officials, it's, trust us, look to us as partners, don't seek to undermine our communities, because the fact of it is that if there is someone who can potentially be violent, it's the families who are going to notice that. It's the friend group that's going to notice that, and we need to have partnerships with government agencies such that there's a trust that if there is a reporting, that it's going to be handled responsibly. And a lot of times there's a sort of this principle of like guilt by association, and we have big mosques. We don't know who, everybody who goes to the mosques, but it's actually the mosques that keep people educated, that keep people engaged in their religion in a really productive way. So, oftentimes our message is look to the mosques as partners in whatever you're doing, not as institutions that you need to surveil. So that's the kind of thing. And I'll just, one more note on that. I have a very vivid memory of walking into the prayer room at JFK Airport. They have a very nice, they have a row of prayer rooms. Maybe some of you have prayed in the Catholic chapel. And when you walk into the Muslim prayer room, there's a camera on the front, camera on the sides, camera over there, camera. Everywhere is cameras. And so I just kind of looked over. I'm like, oh, well, what does the chapel have? And I was like, oh, guess they ran out of cameras. So it's just that kind of sense of unnecessary scrutiny. I mean, we want to be safe too, so we want a level of scrutiny, but that's the tension. I think now it was 2005. One of the things I loved about Islam was the fact that it had rules. It has a lot of rules, and we're in a Benedictine monastery. We can appreciate rules. And so I think it's probably a nice way to end is that, for me, the kind of structure, and it's in the rules, because you have rules, that your spirituality can develop in this really robust way. And praying Vespers or having this commitment to spiritual practice that And I'm going to remind myself I said all this at 5 a.m. when my alarm for morning prayers goes off. But it's that commitment to the difficult things about spirituality, kind of like staying in the game day after day, doing the repetition day after day, struggling when it gets hard, that's where the benefits come. And so that's one of the things I appreciate about Islam. I think maybe it's appropriate that I say the spiritual jihad, the struggle is what I appreciate. So thank you so much, and thank you for having me.